Thank you for joining us for this video lesson. These videos are part of Colorado State University's Grow and Give, a modern victory garden project. These videos were created to help you learn how to grow food, share the harvest, and keep it local. Today I will be teaching you about block-style garden layout. My name is Amy Lentz, and I am a Colorado State University Extension educator in Weld County. Block-style garden layout is a technique used to increase yields as compared to the traditional row-style gardening. This method allows you to space your plants on equidistant centers in blocks. It's a compact, very close plant spacing. It is ideal for planting in raised beds as they are already 3 to 4 feet wide, so it's easy to reach the center of the bed, and it's perfect for creating blocks of crops. You also want to have walkways between your beds of 18 to 24 inches wide to allow you to walk easily in between and to provide increased air circulation throughout the garden. So planting in this block style will eliminate the need for these long single rows. Instead, you will plant a block of lettuce, then a block of carrots, and so on. By having this close spacing in these blocks, you're going to reduce the need for weeding the garden. Check your seed packets for proper plant spacing. Some will show both overall plant spacing, here seen as 6 to 8 inches on center, and also between row spacing, here at 18 inches between rows. Some seed packets will also show you a square foot planting recommendation. Square foot gardening is similar to block style gardening, but it's based off of 1 foot squares, and here we are looking at blocks created in 3 to 4 foot spaces. Smaller garden areas or raised beds are ideal for block style planting. Again, because the block style gardening usually takes place in these 3 to 4 foot wide beds, you don't run the risk of overcrowding the plants to the point of harming them. That's because this overall smaller space is surrounded by walkways, and that will allow for airflow around it. However, if you are planting a crop on a much larger scale, that's where you should follow the in-row and between-row spacing guidelines, because over a large area, you need to create that space for air circulation. Here's another look at how that spacing works. If the picture on the left was a 3-foot bed, you can see that you can fit 2 rows of 4 cabbage plants on 8-inch centers. Then you can follow it up with several rows of beets on 5 to 6-inch centers, and so on. Remember, there will be a walkway around the raised bed that's at least 18 to 24 inches in width, so there will be air circulation around that bed. Compare that to growing in rows. Here you can see that each row is 18 to 24 inches apart. And notice how much more space that would take up. Having that closer spacing will give you more harvest per area and hopefully will help outcompete some weeds for that space and reduce the amount of weeds you have to pull. So when planting in this block style way, you can increase the amount of produce you can grow in your space by 5-fold compared to traditional row style gardening, and up to 15-fold for some of the smaller vegetables. And with so many of us having smaller yards, this is a big incentive to use block style planting. Okay, so for fun, let's walk through a sample of a planting in a raised bed or garden bed that is 4 feet wide by 15 feet long. It might be easier as I go along to think of this in total inches. So for this bed, it's 48 inches wide and 180 inches long. And here's how you can divide it up. So let's start with some of our more common leafy greens. From the end of the bed, you could plant 2 rows of Swiss chard on 9-inch centers. If you leave about 5 inches from the side of the bed, you can fit about 5 plants in each row for a total of 10 Swiss chard plants. Next, let's add 2 rows of spinach with similar spacing needs of 9 inches on center. So that's 10 spinach plants. Sticking with similar sized plants, then we can do 3 rows of lettuce that has a similar spacing need. Keep in mind that these are just general guidelines for spacing, and some varieties may need more or less space than 9 inches. Always check your seed packets for that recommendation. Now, just 1 row of kohlrabi, since you might not be eating as much of that. 1 row of kohlrabi will give you about 5 plants. Next, you can do 4 rows of dry bulb onions at 6 inches on center. Follow that by 2 rows of green onions on 3-inch centers. This is a good time to remind you to plant what you will eat and how much you will eat or plan to donate. I love onions, so I would probably be planting this many. You might decide to plant more or less rows than what I'm showing you here. So this takes us to about 102 inches planted in total in our garden, a little over halfway in our 15-foot long bed. And look how much produce we're able to grow already. So buckle up, because there's a lot more where this came from. So you get the gist. Next, let's do some beets. 2 rows of beets at 6 inches on center will give you about 16 beets. Next, we can do some parsnips, maybe a few rows of those. And then finally, let's put some carrots in to complete the bed space. Just think, almost 200 carrots out of just that one end of the garden bed. This is if you did 12 rows of carrots on 3-inch centers. So what do you notice about these vegetables and how they are grouped into this bed? You can see here that we've split this bed into leafy greens on one end and root crops on the other. By grouping similar crops together, you can manage those crops better, whether that's because they have similar watering needs or soil requirements. Also, it helps in future years when you want to practice some crop rotation, and we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So remember I said buckle up because there's more. This bed that we just outlined might only take up one section of your overall garden. Just think of how much more you can fit into a somewhat small space. The overall garden seen here is about 40 feet by 15 feet. In this amount of space, you can do several groups of beds. Again, remember that the spacing between beds should always be around 18 to 24 inches or more to allow you to easily walk between the beds and to create that good air circulation that you need throughout the garden. So we will also look at beds that are different widths and different lengths in these next few slides. So let's start with the top right bed. You can fit roughly 4 tomatoes in this 3-foot by 12-foot bed if they're on 3-foot centers. Moving down from there, you can do some cole crops like cabbage and broccoli on 18-inch centers in a 4 by 9-foot bed and get roughly 18 plants into that space. Zucchini and summer squash plants can get pretty large and can be quite prolific, so maybe just 2 plants on 3-foot centers in one 4 by 6-foot bed. And really, take it from me, 1 zucchini or summer squash plant will give a big yield, probably more than you can eat. Also, they're pretty easy to grow, so go ahead and try those out. If you want to try out some sweet corn, you'd want to do at least 4 rows of each type for early and late corn. Planting this across several rows to create a block of corn will help with cross-pollination. Because corn is pollinated by wind, you need to have the pollen from one row blow over to the next row, and so on. Finally, you could do your vining crops in a more shallow bed of just 2 feet in width, because they will be growing upright on a trellis, so you don't need as much ground space. So look at all that produce. You can grow so much in a small space. You just have to think it through first and come up with a plan. Then you have enough for not only you, but to share as well. I also want to cover a few other planting techniques. You can do succession planting, where you do some now and some later. This works for things such as lettuce, beets, carrots, and radishes. You can also do succession plantings between crops, where you plant some cool season now, then follow up with some warm season crops, and then go back to the cool season crops. Another type of planting is called intercropping. This is where you plant certain crops together, such as the Three Sisters, a historical way of planting beans, squash, and corn. The squash covers the ground to help with the weeds. Then the beans provide nitrogen for the squash and the corn acts as a trellis for the beans to grow up. Another example of intercropping, as you can see here, is to plant lettuce under other crops. Again, the lettuce acts as a coverage to prevent weeds from growing in that space. Lettuce can also grow in parts shade, so those taller crops shade the lettuce a little bit, and that's okay. You can also mix your edible crops in with your landscape. Or you can add some flowers around your beds to attract pollinators. Finally, over the years that you have your garden, you should try to practice crop rotation, where you move a certain crop from one area to another. This could help avoid things like buildup of diseases and insects into one area that might favor a certain type of plant. This is especially important for crops such as tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, as they can get some soil-borne diseases. So moving them to a different part of the garden is a really good idea every year. So if you want to learn more about block-style garden layout, look for garden note number 713 on the Grow and Give Colorado website, where you can find this and other resources, including more videos on how to grow your own vegetables. So as Audrey Hepburn best said it, to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. So thank you for joining me for this video today. If you have other gardening questions, maybe about your lawn or trees or flowers, you can contact your local CSU Extension office or check out the CSU Extension website, extension.colostate.edu.